The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center webinar. Today, we're continuing our two-part series all about automated vehicles and their implications for bicycling and walking. You might remember, if you attended, that in our previous webinar a couple of weeks ago, we focused on automated vehicle technologies. How do these systems work, and how might they be improved? Today, we're shifting the discussion to really focus on automated vehicle policies and opportunities for communities to be proactive and engage in discussions around automated vehicles. My name is Dan Jeline. I will be facilitating the webinar today, and I'd like to go ahead and take this opportunity to introduce you to each of the panelists that are joining us today. First, Molly Pilon is the Technology and City Transportation Program Manager at the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO. She works with city staff nationwide on issues of technology and sustainable transportation. Her work includes automated vehicle policy, street designs for autonomous urbanism, and better data partnerships for transportation planning. Susan Handy is also with us today. She's a professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy at the University of California at Davis, where she also directs the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, part of the University Transportation Center's program. Her research focuses on the relationships between transportation and land use, particularly the impact of land use on travel behavior and on strategies for reducing automobile dependence. Joe Iacobucci is the Director of Transit for Sam Schwartz, with a focus on the Midwest and West Coast, and leads the firm's national new mobility practice. Among his many focus areas, Joe has been at the forefront of working with cities, institutions, and the private sector on the dramatic changes in transportation brought upon by technology and the shared economy. Finally, we're joined by Art Pierce, who oversees the transportation planning, project management, and active transportation divisions at the Portland Bureau of Transportation in Portland, Oregon. He'll be sharing some information with us about the city's Smart Autonomous Vehicles initiative. We're really grateful to have such an excellent panel here today to share their expertise and perspectives on this important topic. We're thankful that you all joined us today. We hope that you were able to join part one of the series. If not, you can always look back at that discussion. We're excited to continue the discussion here today. I want to go through just a few housekeeping items before we get started with the presentations. First, I'd like to ask the attendees, if you can hear me, to please click the hand icon that's located in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, so that you can let me know by doing that you can hear me and that I'm coming across loud and clear. So I'll look for those hands going up, and they are. Great. Thanks, everybody. I just want to mention, while you're in the webinar, if your computer freezes for any reason, you should just be able to reload the website and log back in and join us at that point. Note that as attendees, you won't be able to speak during the webinar, although you will have the ability to submit questions and comments to us using the chat box, which is located right there within your GoToWebinar panel. I'd encourage you to please ask questions at any time. We will be holding about half an hour at the end for a discussion session with our presenters and panelists. We are posting and have already posted a copy of the presentation slides and will be posting a recording of the webinar to our PBIC website. So you can visit pedbikeinfo.org/webinars to find this webinar page. That's where we're posting all the material from today's session. We should actually have the recording up later today, hopefully, at the latest by tomorrow. So check back then if it's not yet available. We're going to be following up with you after today's session with an email. That'll include a few things, but one of those things will be a certificate of attendance for the webinar. It's actually a link that you can use to generate that. I encourage you that if you are attending with other people at your site, to pass that link along to them so they can also generate that certificate of attendance. The webinar has been approved for 1.5 CM credits by the American Planning Association. If you're interested in claiming those, I'd encourage you to visit their website. That email that's coming to you later today will include a link to the archive page. It'll have information about our new discussion guide that we just released. I'll mention some more about that in just a second. A lot of good information there, so be on the lookout for that. We host webinars once a month, and to find out the latest schedule, I'd encourage you to, first, you can check out pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. You can also sign up for our mailing list. The link is there at the bottom of the screen. We're also pretty active on social media, Facebook and Twitter. Our handle is pedbikeinfo. We're actually going to be tweeting during the webinar today using hashtag PBIC webinar. If you'd like to engage with us there, we'd like to continue talking about this topic on social media and through those venues. I just want to mention, I hinted at this during the first part of this webinar series, our new discussion guide for automated and connected vehicles, pedestrians, and bicyclists is now out. We just released it about 10 minutes ago. And so I'd encourage you all to check this out. You can find it right off of pedbikeinfo.org. It's really intended to be a discussion guide to center conversations around the topic of automated and connected vehicles. We really want this to be a way for anyone, no matter if you're an engineer or a planner or an advocate, somebody involved in policy making or technology, to be able to start having these conversations about some of the challenge areas that we've seen moving forward with automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, with respect to detection, driver handoff, data sharing, right-of-way issues. There's a lot going on in this area, and I think the most important thing, and our panelists would probably agree, is that we all engage in this conversation now and be proactive, and that's really the whole theme of today's webinar. So I won't spend any more time on my housekeeping items. I'm going to move right along to the presentations just after I take my first poll of the day. So if you can take a look at the screen, we just want to find out really about how many people are out there. We're also really interested in finding out, are people attending our webinars just on their own? Are you attending with small groups, large groups? If you can take a moment to tell us a little bit more about who's attending from your site, we would really appreciate the information. We'll be moving then quickly into the first presentation of the day. So I'll probably leave this up for about 10 or 15 more seconds, and then we'll move right along. Okay, just a few more seconds on the poll, and then I'll close it down. I appreciate all of the feedback. Okay, great. Thank you all very much for providing that to us. I'll close the poll now. And Molly Pilon is the first up. So Molly, if you take a look at the screen, things will be coming your way, and you should be able to take over. I'll let you know when I see your screen. Great, I see your screen now. If you go into full screen mode.
Alrighty. Is that good, Dan?
I actually see your speaker notes instead of the slide.
Oh, let's trade. Is that better?
Perfect, perfect. Thank you.
All right, I'm getting a little echo, which will probably stop when you mute. Great, and I will move forward. Hi all, my name is Molly Pilon. As Dan did a great job of introducing, I work on technology and transportation issues at NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And for those of you who don't know, NACTO is a membership-based organization of 55 member cities and transit agencies from across North America. And we work to empower cities to lead the way on transportation policy, raise the state of the practice for street design that prioritizes people walking, biking, and taking transit, and set forth a bold vision for 21st century urban mobility. My presentation today will focus on what city transportation authorities expect from automation and technology, and how it can be a tool for making cities working to create great streets. And to do that, I will start with a bit of scene setting, dig into the past just a little bit. So not that long ago, US cities were pursuing one goal through their roadways, and that was vehicle throughput. Sometimes that was called mobility, but it was only really measured as relative to cars. We have all seen a huge shift in the last decade, and cities are at the forefront of a movement to make use of roadways, which make up about 80% of public space in cities, to achieve many goals: equity and access, public health and safety, economic development, and environmental quality, just to name a few. And what we've seen is that AV technology has come to the table with many promises, telling cities that it will do a whole slew of different things, from eliminating congestion and collisions to decreasing travel costs and potentially decreasing VMT. And what we know is that the private sector shapes products and services, and the public sector should be shaping the outcomes of those products and services. And so At NACTO, we work with our city transportation officials who know that even the best products are not silver bullet solutions to the issues of our existing transportation system, and that the positive outcomes for AV technology are only possible with smart and proactive policy. And cities are setting them up, as you're going to hear more about today, to glean benefits from automation by shaping the street environment. And so what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of what street environments cities can expect from automation and what pieces of the street they're prioritizing now, policy-wise and design-wise. And so what street environments are cities to expect from automation? What we've seen is that many researchers and developers in the field in the past are focused on delivering driverless cars, but not on what happens outside of the bubble of their windshield. So that leaves us with graphical representations, kind of like this one, where the future reflects congestion-free isolation, and the sidewalks either don't exist or don't have people on them. And so we at NACTO are working with our membership to use AVs to create great places for everyone. And so what does that mean right now? That means that we, in the last couple of months, have been working with a coalition of other partner organizations, including NRDC, Transportation for America, and NLC, to urge Congress to prioritize safety, preserve the authority of local governments to manage their transportation systems, and implement robust data sharing requirements for AV operators on the federal automated vehicle policy. And the groundwork for this was laid last June by our AV policy statement, and it welcomes policies and regulations that use AV technology as a tool to promote safety, reduce environmental impact, support public transit, and do much more. And so now what NACTO is doing, in addition to working on federal policy, is working with our cities to figure out the tools that they need to shape their streets for to realize the goals that they've had before AV technology was even at the table, and to see how they can use this as a tool to move forward. And so that focuses on kind of these 4 topic areas to realize those near-term benefits, including dramatically improved safety, robust real-time data sharing, enhanced and improved transit, and democratized curb use. And so I'm going to go into what each of those mean from a street design and potential policy perspective pretty quickly here for you. So first is improving safety. How could AVs make city streets safer streets? New technology should allow us to narrow the space dedicated to vehicular traffic with closer following distances and less congestion. There's not a need for more than 1 or 2 travel lanes for private cars in city centers. And so rebalancing the right-of-way away from vehicle movement means pedestrians could become the focus of street design. And so what that means, kind of from the NACTO perspective, is that cities can take the NACTO position of AVs not exceeding a peak speed of 25 miles an hour on city streets. And that still would be a large increased average travel speed, as currently average travel speeds in city centers average between 8 and 10 miles per hour. And in addition to safety benefits for street users, low speeds give all people walking and biking and using that street a feeling of safety on the street. So in summary, human scale maximum operating speeds, minimum stopping distances for AVs operating on city streets, and rebalancing the right-of-way in favor of active street users are kind of our 3 points for using AVs to improve safety in cities. In the next focus area, we work with our cities on data sharing and how AVs will allow us to better manage our streets. And so what we're seeing is that TNCs and fleets today and AVs tomorrow present transportation agencies around the country with more data and information than we could have ever imagined, but you can't manage what you don't measure. And we know that data sharing in this realm is a really tricky issue. And NACTO is working with the Open Transport Partnership on creating a third-party platform that anonymizes and aggregates transportation data from private partners. And that focuses around key areas outlined in our city data sharing principles that came out this past January. So the next area that we are working on with our cities is expanding transit. And we hear a lot about how AVs will change transit and are already changing transit. And we think that AVs could change transit to allow cities to reach more people and more destinations. But we know that transit, as cities and public agencies have known it, is in transition. So in the top scenario, transit vehicles are operating in mixed traffic, significantly slowing them down. And in the bottom scenario, high capacity transit has been given its own lane. AV technology has increased roadway capacity, allowing us to give back space to pedestrians and bicyclists. So how do AVs enable us to get city streets to look like the latter version instead of the former version? And so first, cities can rebalance the right-of-way for the most efficient uses now. And second, they can focus on high capacity, high ridership, fixed route transit as the backbone of the city. And so just digging into that a little bit more, what does this mean for transit? It means our networks will look different than they have in the past, and they can reach more people and more destinations. And that cities can build on the strengths that they have now and focus on utilizing their rights of way to prioritize high quality fixed route service through dedicated transit lanes, and improve service on the networks that they already have. And then flexible route transit should be layered onto these robust fixed route networks to connect people to more destinations, and the system should be rounded out by point-to-point transit, which, as we know, has the potential to reduce travel time and provide access to more destinations. And to support this better transit and the expanding transit options available now and in future cities, we have been hearing a lot about cities turning to their increasingly demanded infrastructure today, which is their curbs. And so 10 years ago, curb space in cities was considered mainly an extension of private property, mainly used for vehicle storage. But now we've seen a huge shift in that, and demand for the curb has grown exponentially. And so we find that our cities are increasingly wanting and needing to design their infrastructure to support this growing number of users, including, as you see here, delivery, active uses like parklets, commuter shuttles, significantly increased freight, different types of fleets, bike share, bicyclists, etc. And to change these uses and to take advantage of the street space, cities are shifting their uses of the curb incrementally and really experimenting today with different pickup and drop off zones for safer loading and unloading. And they're additionally prioritizing curb inventory data to better understand their existing street environments. So in summary, cities are focusing on preparing now by introducing smart policy, which I'm sure Art will talk to you more about, and innovative street design in these areas so that they can use automation as a tool to work toward city goals. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. I think that's a great way to kick things off. A lot of important things to be thinking about for everybody on the line. And as I turn over to Susan for the next presentation, I forgot to mention this earlier, but we're really interested in hearing, in addition to the questions you have, which we want you to send those to us, obviously, but you're all engaged in this topic, and we're really curious to know what are your biggest concerns moving forward with respect to automated vehicles. Maybe if you said in our last webinar, you have concerns about certain elements of the technology. You might be wondering about, how does this shift look alongside our sort of mode shift goals if we want to increase active transportation What concerns do you have about automated vehicles and what that might mean? Any concern you have in this area, we're really interested in hearing about that. If you start sending those to us now, we hope to fold those into our discussion period. So in addition to your questions, we want to just hear generally your comments and your concerns about where this might be going. So go ahead and do that, but I'm going to, Susan, turn the screen over to you to continue on with our presentations today. So I'll let you know when I see your screen, and we can go from there.
Great, thank you, Dan. Do you hear me?
I do, and I see your screen.
Great, then I'll get started. Thank you all for listening in. Thanks to Molly for a great introduction. I'm going to make many of the same points, but using a rather different framework. So here at the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Davis, otherwise known as ITS Davis, with support from the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, we've been thinking about the three revolutions, as we call it. So not just automated vehicles, but also ride pooling or shared, a shared version of all of this, and as well thinking about zero emission vehicles, electric vehicles in particular. So we talk about the three revolutions: sharing, electrification, and automation. And it's our belief that it's the combination of these three revolutions that gets us the best outcomes from the standpoint of sustainability. In fact, Lou Fulton, one of our wonderful researchers, recently published a report that he led in conjunction with ITDP, the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, that shows that sharing really is the key to more sustainable outcomes. So if you just have two revolutions, electrification and automation, you really don't have, well, you certainly don't have much reduction in the number of vehicles on the road over business as usual. You do get many benefits in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But if you put those two revolutions together with sharing, that's where you get the most significant outcomes, particularly in terms of reducing the number of vehicles on the road. Now note the bike over there with the bus in the three revolution scenario. Active travel, we believe, is a critical component of this scenario for reasons I'll talk about in just a minute. So last November, ITS Davis hosted a workshop to talk about the three revolutions. We brought a whole bunch of people together to think about different aspects of this. And I led the discussion on active travel with respect to the three revolutions. We published a policy brief that summarizes the discussion that we had. And I want to note that this credit really goes to the whole group involved, and in particular to Neelima Shah at the Bullitt Foundation and Sahar Shirazi at the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research. So the policy brief summarizes and reflects the discussions we had at this workshop. And so my comments today come out of this policy brief. Now, one of the key premises of the discussion is that active travel very much supports the three revolutions, and in fact that the sharing version of the three revolutions really depends on active travel. So in the sharing scenario as we see it, that means lower auto ownership. If people can take advantage of shared automated electric vehicles, they have less need to own their own car. But if they do not own their own car, then car use really becomes just one of a set of, or a suite of mobility options that people will be drawing on. So we think about it in terms of this idea of mobility integration. So active travel will play a very important role, as it does now, in being a mode of transport for short trips, of which we have many in the US, but also as a way to support transit, access to and from transit. So when I get to policies in another couple of slides, you'll see that they are really very much aimed towards supporting this shared version of automation, because that's what's going to be best for active travel, and that's where active travel has the most important role. But before I get there, I do want to note that, of course, there are also revolutions going on in active travel and in bicycling in particular. So, of course, bike sharing systems, which are very much a part of this three revolutions future, electric assist bicycles, which I personally think have lots of potential that we could tap into. I did put a little figure of a skateboarder up there because, in fact, we are seeing other kinds of devices being used increasingly, sometimes human propelled, but also now electrified, so electric skateboards and other sorts of devices. Of course, automation, the role of automation in active travel itself is a little less obvious, but we do have this fourth generation of bike sharing that relies more on automation. You might think about moving sidewalks as a form of active travel automation, and so on and so forth. So most of what we focused on were the implications of these three revolutions for active travel. And it's important to note that while there are lots of positives, there are also potentially negative implications of the three revolutions. And even if you look at the positives, you'll see lots of conditional statements where the positives are not necessarily a given. So the question is, how do we avoid the negatives, and how do we ensure the positives? How do we ensure that everything evolves in a way that's going to be a good thing for active travel? So we thought a lot about this and what sort of policies could be put in place to ensure that things come out the way we'd like them to come out. And the statement that I've got there was really the overarching principle that we settled on. And it's the idea that our community should be designed for people and not vehicles. And of course, there have been a lot of people pushing this idea for a long time, but it becomes even more important when we think about a future with automated vehicles. So we came up with a lot of different policies to be considered, and I'm going to go through them in these categories: built environment policies, policies specifically about automated vehicles, and then also some ideas about planning processes and practices. And as you'll see, there are really policy considerations at all levels of government, from federal to state to regional to local level. So the first category is built environment policies, which mostly are a local government responsibility, but we do see ways that regional and state policies can help to support what local governments are trying to do, especially when it comes to making funding available for investments in active travel. And if you look through this list, most of this will look very familiar and not all that specific to thinking about automated vehicles. Many communities are already doing many of these things as a part of more general sort of smart growth kinds of planning efforts. But we feel that these are even more important now as a defense against the potential negative impacts of automated vehicles. So we've got an even stronger impetus to be thinking about these kinds of policies. The second category of policies we looked at are more directly about automated vehicles. Some are about technologies, and those are well beyond my area of expertise, but you'll see that other ideas we had have to do with policies on where automated vehicles can operate, what streets they use, issues about drop-off zones that Molly has already talked about, and then also policies on how automated vehicles can operate. So policies about speeds and what sort of speeds on what sort of facilities, policies about prioritizing shared AVs over single occupant AVs, and so on and so forth. And then the final category that we considered sort of falls into this idea of planning processes and practices. We see a need for attention to these as well. As with the policies on built environment that we outlined, these are things we need to be doing regardless of automated vehicles. But again, automated vehicles make them that much more important. So you can see some of these are about processes, some of these are about updating and improving our planning tools. And then, of course, since we are a research institute, we like to think about what questions there are for research, and we think there are many of them. These are just some of the ideas we had. Lots of questions about street design. How do we design streets to minimize conflicts? Lots of questions around parking. Lots of speculation about how automated vehicles are going to reduce the need for parking. We don't know exactly what that trajectory is going to be. What can we do more proactively with parking policies to ensure this all plays out the way we'd like it to? And then some interesting ideas echoing some of the points Molly made about data collection, and in particular, is there some opportunity to take advantage of automated vehicles to collect better data about active travel. So you can read all about it in our policy brief, which is conveniently located online, of course. Feel free to get in touch if you want to follow up on these ideas. We hope that the policy brief can be a helpful resource to all of you out there. And with that, I look forward to hearing from Art and Joe about some of the things that are going on in different communities. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that presentation, Susan, and for the pointing people to your policy brief. I think I just dropped a link out to you all, so you can hopefully follow that and get right there to that information that Susan shared. But I'm going to move over now and move to Joe Iacobucci for his presentation. We'll continue the discussion. So Joe, take a look, and you should be able to take over the screen and broadcast your slides. Okay, I see your screen now, Joe. And Joe, it actually looks like you're still on mute too. So if you're trying to talk, I can't hear you. There you go.
Okay, I think that worked. Okay, great. Well, thanks. I'm going to build off of the previous presentations here and discuss a little bit of our work in this field, focusing on a report that we put out last spring with our partners HRNA and Arcadis called Driverless Future. But previous to this is also sort of a compendium of the work that we've been doing for cities across the country, including New York City, City of Seattle and King County Metro, as well as some work that we've done for the MPOs in the state of California to really try to put our arms around what does a potential driverless future mean for cities. And this report, which is available online at driverlessfuture.org, I'll show that in my end slide, really focuses on being a policy roadmap for city leaders. And within this, we tried to take some very basic modeling exercises to identify what are the potential impacts, but sort of building on some of the other great work that's been done in this field. And then based on those potential shifts in mode share that we've seen from our modeling, identify what a policy framework for cities are. So some of this, again, will be a little bit redundant, but I will try to make some new points building off the great presentations thus far in this webinar. So just wanted to start with the stages of autonomy. This is from Mike Lemansky, showing the different stages of automation. And where we're at today is somewhere between level 1 and level 2, between assisted and partial automation, depending on the vehicles that you have. The Teslas, probably the furthest along, would be considered partial automation. But as we build to the future, a lot of our focus is on level 4 or 5 automation, which the best estimates right now are looking at sometime between the next 10 and 20 years for this technology to be able to be fully escalated. There have been also several reports for more aggressive. That's not necessarily my background nor my expertise, but just to kind of put it out there, the important point that we wanted to make was in the next generation, this will be something that cities will have to be able to deal with, that this is in our generation of planning as practitioners that we have to be able to tackle. And so, sort of moving on here, just asking the basic questions, what does this mean for cities? And there's been a lot of great reports. One of the biggest points that have been made thus far is looking at the potential safety benefits. That simply that drivers, there's a lot of driver error out there, especially with distracted driving, that create tens of thousands of fatalities every year. And when you look at the numbers in crashes alone, over $6 million or 6 million crashes per year, there is a great potential to greatly reduce these crashes and this aspect of the transportation paradigm. The other aspect that I wanted to touch on, which has been argued out there, is looking at congestion, and it's our perspective that congestion won't change that much. This is, I think, really well illustrated by this illustration from Copenhagen ICU. We have basically we've built out our roadways, and the choke points in our cities and regions will continue to be choke points in cities and regions that simply switching from people driving their own vehicle to being driven will not change that paradigm. But what our study really focuses on, what are the major macro trends, and what does this mean for the future of cities? And before we go into the transportation aspect, the point we want to make is that this is part of a very connected world that's evolved very quickly in the last 20 years, that simply put, everybody has a world of information at their fingertips at all times. And this demonstrates also that with this change that people can connect to information and services. This is beyond what the day-to-day transportation world provides, but is also part of just being woven into the social fabric, connected to an Internet of Things as opposed to information. What does this mean for how people get around, and the value of ownership and owning the vehicle that they drive for most of their trips? Currently, people driving an SUV estimate at about 80–90% of all trips in most regions. And what we see here is a potential huge shift with that background of being a connected society, that just like everything else in our world, there's a commodification of the mobility in trips. And so what this demonstrates in the figure on the right is, instead of owning a cow, you could simply buy the milk, or in other words, instead of being sort of attached to the romantic design of a personal vehicle being attached to identity, what we're seeing is a shift to basically people wanting to have the right trip for the right price, for the right purpose. And that's demonstrated in trends of millennials not getting their licenses, half of which don't have a license until they're 18 years old, lower car ownership rates for the millennial generation. And simply put, that next statement is that functionality is starting to dominate, while form, brand, and importance and identity are losing value in the society. So with that question in mind, what we did is we tried to estimate, based on price alone, what the mode shift would be from people currently owning their own vehicles, just from a price perspective, switching to a connected autonomous vehicle service run like a TNC in different regions in New York, Los Angeles, and Dallas. And based off of that, from price alone, what we found was that the results show that the commuting shifts will be dramatic. In the New York, New Jersey MSA, we experienced a shift of about 46 to 60%, or 2.4 to 3.6 million cars from personal vehicle commuting to AV ride sourcing exclusively. Or the upper part shows when that was modeled through AV ride sourcing and AV ride sharing, assuming that there's more than one passenger per vehicle. So New York demonstrates obviously a sort of an outlier in the US. So we modeled two other regions to basically show a spectrum. And in the Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim area, we still saw major shifts, even where parking is often free or lower, to 36 to 44%, or 1.8 million to 2.2 million from personal vehicle commuting to AV ride sourcing. And then Dallas-Fort Worth, which shows sort of the low cost of parking and a lot of sprawl development, we even see a shift of 21 to 31%. So the analysis also, and this is all available in the report, also breaks down the results geographically by coupling the cost-driven shifts of the analysis with land use density and its ability to support mass transit. So what this represents, going from left to right, is 0.3 housing units per acre in the green, which is an auto-based paradigm, 10 to 20 housing units per acre in the darker green. That's the housing units per acre that supports a bus-based transit system. You go all the way over to the right, where you have 150 plus units per acre, and that's enough to support rail-based transit. And what you're seeing is there's shifts in every one of these different types of land use. We also wanted to identify that and break these down to show the potential threats to transit as well. And so as you get further to the right, there's also a threat to add cars to the road by taking people off trains and buses. So that's the analysis. Basically we wanted to show, is this going to be a small shift, or is it going to be a big shift? And the answer that we got was it's going to be a big shift. And some of the big threats or opportunities that we saw are threats and opportunities for equity and inclusion, increased competition for public transit, potentially phasing out of parking and car-based infrastructure related to vehicle ownership, growth in walkable mixed-use cities and suburbs, and that's based on the lower cost for development for mixed-use development to make those areas walkable. So based on that, we identified a policy framework, and this is just an outline of that. But I'll go over a few of the points that we think that cities need to be looking at as we go into the future. And that's, first one is to leverage technology to enhance mobility. There has to be an open data mandate for any company that's privately operating on our public streets that are publicly built and owned to be able to share their data. It's currently an issue with a lot of cities right now. But there are cities that are leading the way, including New York City and other cities that have lesser agreements for open data. Universal apps and smart cards need to be implemented in cities, as we see WIM in Helsinki, Finland, is a good best practice. The second element is to prioritize and modernize public transit, and this is a repeat of an earlier point by Molly, but simply put, the transit networks in the US are funded about half as much as our first world counterpart cities. And that has to change, and it's going to become a larger issue if transit agencies can't compete with privately provided mobility. And nothing has the power to move the masses like public transit. You can literally move 1,000 people per second past a fixed point on a train. Implement dynamic pricing. This can go in a few different forms: Gordon pricing or zone pricing in London or Singapore or Sweden, to things that we have today like variable tolls. Those dynamic pricing aspects have to be looked at and implemented in order to ensure that optimization occurs. The last three I'll just go over at a high level. Plan for mixed-use car-light neighborhoods. The fact that we won't have to build as much parking allows for those neighborhoods to be developed at a cheaper rate. In addition, the numbers show that about 2/3 of people desire to live in a mixed-use car-light neighborhood where they can walk to services, even though the supply currently isn't out there. Number 5, encourage adaptable parking as we're building new parking structures, and there are great examples being developed in Los Angeles or in Boston where parking structures can be adapted after they're built to office or residential uses, floor by floor. And then number 6 is to promote equitable access to jobs and services. The equity or inclusion argument is going to be one of the biggest challenges to ensure as we experience this mobility revolution that everybody has access to the system. Mayor Peduto in Pittsburgh, I think, put it best, and he said, "If it's not for all of us, it's not for us." Just to follow up as we get to a few of those points, just to put a finer point on this, it's our opinion that cities need to embrace and manage shared, connected, and autonomous vehicles. This is an active role. This is not setting up a policy and sort of letting the system work, but this is a more active management of the system. To put another point on the transit, steps need to be taken with harmonization with the transit network. And so what this illustrates, this is the DART regional rail system. And the types of trips that we want to encourage are those that you see in the black arrows, where they're providing last mile connections or greater access to the transit network to serve as that backbone. What we want to reduce are those redundant shared trips that are redundant with the rail system. In Chicago, where I live, we have a rail connection to both airports, and the kind of trips that we want to reduce are those shared AV trips to the airports, because we already have a high capacity, high speed option to those areas. And one of the final points I just want to make, this was a concept that we developed with FX File. A couple people from our New York office, Sam Frommer and Dan Shack, worked on this project. And this is an interesting concept that shows that these changes can be done incrementally as we look at better pedestrian and bicycle and transit infrastructure. As the reduction of public space is needed for the storage of cars with parking, we can take the parklet concept, which has been popularized over the last 10 years in most of our major cities, and basically incrementally rededicate space to bike, pedestrian, and transit uses. And that's already done in a lot of our cities. And I think this is the final point I just want to make, is that a lot of our cities are already doing the right things. This is the Loop Link, which is a complete streets corridor in downtown Chicago. This is a project I worked on in my previous life at the Chicago Transit Authority. But essentially what this project did is it looked at who is using the street, and what we found was that half of the people between the curbs were using transit, and transit didn't have a dedicated right-of-way. This provided much more space for transit, also established the first dedicated bike lanes through downtown Chicago, and freed up more pedestrian space for pedestrians by not having to compete with bus customers boarding the bus. So I'll leave it off here and just say that the report is a very concise 23 pages, and it's made to be viewed by people at all levels. I think it'll for leadership level, it'll be concise enough to gain their interest, but also at the practitioner level, there will be a lot of information in there, and I hope you guys can all all learn from this. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. Great look at all the work you all have been doing. Thanks for that. Art Pierce is up next. And Art, I'm moving the screen to you. And let me know if you have any trouble seeing it, but you should be able to go live with your slides. All right, you're all set.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. All right, hello everyone. So I'm going to sort of pivot a little bit and see if we can turn the conversation sort of from the policy and the overall vision and into what cities might be able to do directly in their own environments to try to shift the conversation and lead the conversation as the change is happening. So in Portland, like many cities, let's see if I can get this to, there we go. We have been entering into the conversation, and it really starts at a very broad level in terms of what does the future of mobility, but also kind of human life look like. And if the more and more, if the anticipation is that we are going to be transported beings, like shown here in the WALL-E screenshot, who are being advertised to, this is probably not a very vibrant human life. And one of the basic truths that we know is that unless the human body is given exercise on a daily basis, we are not going to remain healthy. And so the stakes are relatively high, and it really isn't just about mobility. It is about community, about connection between people. And so I think this is a good demonstration of why it really is important for city management to plan ahead and shape the path that this conversation progresses. One of the other interesting pieces is, you have to remember sort of what are we trying to solve as we're trying to have this conversation. And I think we've already had some good illustrations around this, but if you're just looking at your city system, like ours here on the left that shows the congestion of our freeway system, you'll make it one set of answers, but especially as you're understanding how autonomy may play into the system, it's pretty quick to understand that if we're just changing an individual driving themselves in a car to a person being driven by someone else in an Uber or Lyft to someone being driven by an autonomous vehicle, we actually aren't addressing a problem there. We're just changing the user experience, but not actually how the city functions. So here in Portland, I think like in many cities, we had a political interest in understanding how this can start happening in Portland in terms of embracing autonomous vehicles, and a real interest in giving a open door type of interface to growth and technology and to private sector players. I think one of the main concerns, certainly from the agency side, was this was largely a political conversation in which large industry firms were coming to visit the city hall and saying, hey, we'd like to start talking about this, we'd like to come to Portland, but without a whole lot of articulation about what is it that Portland wants. And if we're trying to understand the future of cities, we want to be able to describe how autonomous vehicles can respond to the interests and needs and urban problems of Portland or other cities. And really being able to set the marker that technology here is in service to what city wants, not that the cities need to determine how they're going to respond to autonomous vehicles as a reactive mode. And one of the key first messages for any of these things, of course, is that you have to say what you want if you're going to expect to get what you want. And the other joke that we sometimes talk about is you are either at the table or you're on the menu. And so if you're not proactively putting out a stance and aggressively entering the conversation, you will just be told how it's going to happen at the end. I think one of the other key elements is it's really, we should not assume that autonomous vehicle developers and providers are city experts. So they are technology experts. They're experts in emerging technology and how mobility may play into that. But we're the city experts. And so that's really where it's our role to lay out how we want to see things move ahead. So here in Portland, what we did to try to grab hold of the conversation and shape it is we worked with our mayor and our transportation commissioner to issue a directive. Actually, essentially, they directed us to initiate a smart autonomous vehicle initiative here in Portland. And it had 4 elements. One, preparation of a policy foundation that we could bring to city council. The second was issuing a request for information. The third is preparing of administrative rules. I'm going to go into each of these in a little more detail. And the fourth is public engagement. So essentially, real simple, short steps, but getting the direction from the political leadership and the concurrence from them that we want to take a deliberate and systematic approach. It was really encouraging, the response both that we got from the press, also from other city commissioners, that this was a really smart way to proceed. So the first key piece is, if we were trying to look at how technology can be of service to cities, we have to make sure that we're defining the right outcomes and goals. So we relied heavily on the goals that we already had in our overall comprehensive plan, and then also in our Vision Zero action plan as well. And so we're focusing in on directing that the things we're trying to solve are things, are issues such around safety, climate, equity, health, economic opportunity, the importance of creating great places and doing that all in a cost-effective way, and using that framework to say, this is the way in which we're going to be judging new technology innovations and deciding whether they are exciting to us or not. And I think that's really key, is to be able to have technology providers who want to enter this space to understand how they're going to be measured, so that it's not arbitrary, and it's also not something that sort of steps into favoritism, depending on who they talk to. So that's, I think, one key element of it. The other piece is specifically around mobility. Portland, in its comprehensive plan, adopted a people movement system, essentially articulating very similar to what Vancouver, BC had adopted. And this version here is one that's adapted to include autonomous vehicles and is now in at our Planning and Sustainability Commission for deliberation. But very clearly saying that in terms of how we want to see people movement happen and how we want to put our investments, our priorities are specifically walking. We want that to be the most competitive mobility option for trips of 1 mile or less. For cycling, we want it to be the most competitive for 3 miles or less. Transit for those longer trips. And then at that point, we want fleet autonomous vehicles that are electric and shared to fit into that framework and complement those other elements. And I think as you're looking towards future deliberations around use of the right-of-way, use of the curb zone, being able to have this hierarchy sort of pre-deliberated so that individual conversations on an individual street aren't one-offs is really, really important. So for our request for information, we issued a request for information a couple months ago and just received responses from 18 different entities from 5 states. And we put it out there as essentially, here are the problems we're trying to solve, here are the goals that we've articulated within our policy framework, and have essentially put that out to private industry to say, how do you want to partner with us on solving these types of city problems? And what would the needs that those firms might have in terms of partnerships or investment or use of facilities from the city? The key part of this is saying we want to be a partner in deliberately making this happen. So we are willing to invest if it's something we feel like will further our goals. We are willing to make changes to the operations of the right-of-way to try to see how we can further these goals. And so I think it's really encouraging that the level of response that we got from a whole variety of entities, we're saying, yes, this is something that's worth doing some intentional work together on, and I think it can really help shape the types of products that are being developed. One of the other key pieces that we are continuing to articulate is the role of local agencies, and this was talked some about in Susan's earlier presentation. But I think one of the key pieces that has at least helped us articulate at the state level and to others is that we don't believe that cities should be determining the requirements of the specific vehicles as much as it is on the operations and use of the city's roads. And that's existing city authority. That is very important. How does an autonomous vehicle know whether it's allowed to drive on the sidewalk? That's local rules. How does it know what speeds that it should be operating? Again. And so, and particularly around the drop-off and pickup zones, those are going to be things that are determined on a local level and are very specific to local environments. And so that's why there's such a key importance of local role. And also that's where congestion and the possibilities of congestion pricing and other pricing tools really have the most viability as it is if you start to get to more and more of the localized level. And so in terms of as cities are thinking about sort of how this might play into them and where the decisions might be, I think it's important to just start making a list of ways in which you currently manage your streets, and thinking about how you may want to change your regulatory structure, and really disperse this conversation from being one that is just within your policy and planning department into the groups that do the day-to-day operations of these different spaces. It can actually be kind of a fun exercise, right, to deploy staff out to some of these different departments and get a little bit of feedback of what the ideas are that come from folks who are managing parking operations on a daily basis, or thinking about how they interface with various technology providers in terms of use of poles or use of the pavement, those kind of things. And then lastly, I think thinking about maintenance requirement. If the importance of lane striping, for instance, suddenly becomes more important and the like, all of those things will have ripples through many different parts of your departments. One key first step, if you haven't done so, it's really important to let your state legislature know that your city cares and has strong opinions about this this emerging process. I was surprised by the number of statewide conversations that didn't seem to have really aggressive city participation. And it certainly worked for us. We very quickly jumped in during our legislative session this last year and successfully changed the conversation to say we have a successful partnership system underway through our autonomous vehicle initiative, and that really that the state level doesn't need to try to solve this problem immediately. That we already believe we have the ability to authorize testing within the Portland roadways, and that really the moves at the state level would be premature at this level. And so we were successful in participating in and really helping to shape this interagency legislative work group that developed at the state level, and they determined not to produce a bill this session and really look ahead towards next year once we have more information about how the system may go forward. So that's a high level of what we've done. I think this is a great opportunity to turn this towards a broader conversation of what other folks are experiencing in their communities.
Okay, thanks, Art, very much. That's a great chance for us to transition over into the discussion period. A lot of really good questions that have come in, and so I want to put a slide up on the screen here. I'm predicting that we won't get through every single question, so for that reason, I would like to encourage you all to jot down some of the contact information for our various panelists. Laura Sant also's email is here. She was heavily involved in that discussion guide I mentioned in the last webinar. We want to provide these contacts to you in case we don't get to your questions, but let's just get right into it because I've got quite a few that I captured. Bridging the gap from the last webinar to this one, we talked about technology last time. There was a lot of concern about how AVs can or can't detect and interact with pedestrians and bicyclists in the way we think they should or might. Which might make the case for stronger case for separated bike lanes and other facilities that we know are already adding comfort and creating space between bicyclists, pedestrians, and motorized traffic. But others raise concerns about, if separation exists, it might lead to pedestrians and bicyclists kind of being marginalized from public space and kind of being pushed off where the roadways are kind of left, for the free reign of the autonomous vehicles. That balancing between creating those more comfortable places to ride and to walk versus kind of pushing bicyclists and pedestrians off of that of the roadway area and kind of marginalize them. So I want to open that up. Does anybody on the panel have a thought about that kind of balancing between separation as sort of being proactive, but then also kind of sacrificing something at the same time?
All right, I'm happy to jump in. This is Art. I do think this is one of the sort of more worrisome dynamics that's in play as you think about the experience that people have of streets as pedestrians or cyclists, and unless we are really aggressively saying that we're not going to sacrifice comfort and use for pedestrians and cyclists, that it very likely would result over time in stronger regulation, essentially, of pedestrians or cyclists because of the desire to sort of segment the street environment. So again, I think it's very important to say that the intention is to have autonomous vehicles, when they're ready to do so, be able to respond to a much more dynamic street environment, not have the street environment be sterilized to respond to autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great points, Art. Great points. Any other thoughts on that from our other panelists?
This is Susan. I would just add to that I think we need to think about what's appropriate in different parts of the region. And, there may be areas we designate as, as the more people-oriented areas, where you have one treatment, and then the areas that are more about mobility where you have a different kind of treatment. So, context is going to matter, I think, in how we approach this as well.
I'll just add to that too. I think there's a couple other variables in play regarding, some people are of the persuasion that updated vehicle design that would make car materials softer and less prone in an accident to cause injury or death is one way of looking at this. But the other is that I think was one of the major challenges from the technological side is to identify how AVs and people will mix without having cars have to be reduced to 5 miles an hour. I say that in a lot of our CBDs and mixed-use neighborhoods that that may be what ends up happening at the outturn. Or I think you also see a shift to a lot of car-free zones in the future as well. To ensure that the pedestrian and bike facilities can live harmoniously with autonomous vehicles.
Great points all around. Thank you for that. I want to jump to one, Molly, a question for you actually, on a topic related to, you shared a few examples of kind of looking at this whole idea of mixing, bringing the speeds down for AVs and having these shared circumstances where everyone seems to be about on the same playing field, pedestrians, bicyclists, those lower speeds. The concept is great. This topic that comes up, and it's one that I've heard a lot too, is are there going to be situations in which it's pedestrians and bicyclists that really are the rulers of the road, in quotes, where the vehicles are constantly yielding to pedestrians and bicyclists? Are there going to be situations where the vehicles really aren't moving that much in these downtown, very dense urban settings? Is there a case to be made for recreating these streets entirely and keeping vehicles off of them, or are you risk of some kind of gridlock situation? I think we all think of these circumstances where people just keep crossing and there's no opportunity or really guideline in place for the vehicles to keep moving. Can you talk about that a little bit? Have you run into that kind of question before?
Yeah, we definitely have. And it's a great question. And I think cities and our kind of group working on this work at NACTO is definitely grappling with the ideas that come with that. So kind of ensuring that urban streets see a maximum of 25 miles an hour for vehicle operating speeds. And also that, we have the street environment now where pedestrians are expected to yield to all other users of the street, right? They're the lowest on the food chain in many situations. And the future presents this wonderful example, like you said, and wonderful potential for the pedestrians to kind of be the rulers of the street, and that vehicles would always yield to them in urban scenarios. And I think that gives way to the rebalance the right of way kind of approach that you saw in some of our graphics, which is more seeing kind of residential or even lower density commercial streets as front yards and as people spaces to an even greater extent, and really starting that now with using curb space like cities have been using it. And Joe showed in his presentation with the public square incrementally adding those different types of spaces to streets is definitely where we can start. And I think that it presents a great opportunity, but definitely challenges along the way, especially in communicating that vision with those working on the technology side.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I want to kind of keep on that topic of talking about curb space. A lot of interest among our audience members today about curb space, parking policies, kind of managing curb space as it exists now, and kind of a concern for, as AVs may become more prevalent, that there's risk of maybe that curb space and that sort of that space that is being able to be converted to parklets and shared space being kind of taken over as more lanes for these vehicles to get through. And I wonder if you all are aware of good policies that are being put in place, or ways that you can effectively kind of manage that curb space and maybe incorporate some interesting designs and still kind of keep that space, that area set aside, so that it isn't eventually then turned back over to a travel way or a vehicle lane. Any thoughts on that from you all?
I'll take a stab at that one again. So we're working with quite a few interested cities, as it sounds like many people who are listening in are interested on flexible loading zones and what that could look like for both pickup and drop off near transit, and also for freight, and what the future of freight in cities looks like, and how you can make that work seamlessly with increased demand for curbside uses like the ones we've been talking about, and including bike lanes. And I would say our biggest recommendation, and what we're seeing from kind of the leading cities in this space, is that the first step to managing your curbs and ensuring that those don't get turned over into travel lanes is having a thorough curb inventory. So knowing what your street looks like and what your curb space looks like, so that you can go into these conversations with private sector mobility companies, and a lot of the conversations from kind of an educated background, so that you're working as a peer with them to allocate these different areas, instead of having them tell you kind of what's on your curb as a city.
Great, thanks, Molly. A lot of the discussion so far, and a lot of the recommendations and some of the example policies seem to be definitely more geared toward or focused on maybe more dense urban areas, large cities. There are a lot of questions coming about what does this mean for maybe rural areas, suburban areas where land uses are different. There may not be as much biking and walking now. Are these types of settings or these areas maybe more at risk of the automated vehicle kind of running the road, running the show, and being that's the main concern, whereas the bicycling and walking really isn't already on the same level as where it might be in a dense urban environment, even though that's where these communities want to get to. Can you talk at all about maybe lessons or applications for suburban communities or rural areas to be thinking about as this shift happens? I don't know if Joe, you have any thoughts about this. I don't know if your study or research touched on any of those issues.
Sorry, I was having issues with the mute button again. Yeah, so would you be able to repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, it was really around the issue of, a lot of the examples that we've seen and things we've looked at were in, it seems to be more of a dense urban environment that we're talking about, a lot of curb space issues, a lot of things that may be more relevant to cities, not necessarily rural and suburban communities, who may want to be engaged in this topic, but maybe aren't seeing a lot of relevance with some of the guidance that's out there, and some of the examples that may have been shared. So do you see lessons or maybe transferability of some of the concepts to those who may be working in more of a suburban setting, thinking about kind of preparing themselves for this shift that's happening?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So that's one thing we were cognizant of when we did our report and we did the modeling for our report, is we tried to do the modeling to show the impacts on exurban areas. And so we divided up the housing density from 0 to 3 housing units per acre to 3 to 10 housing units per acre. And I think those are both your suburban paradigms or even rural paradigms or exurban paradigms. And what we see there is actually is a very still a very high mode shift for those areas, even though the price of parking in most of those areas is free. There'll still be a good percentage of vehicle reduction that we see in those areas. Now, the congestion impacts or the curb space will probably be less intense than what we'll see in our denser paradigms. But there is still a great opportunity, for to ensure that there's equity and inclusion in those areas. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons. I think the other lesson too is people that are living in the suburban or exurban areas. A lot of them are still connecting to the job centers in the CBD. And I think the other big challenge will be coordination with a driverless future and the transit network. And so there's systems across the country are currently forming partnerships with TNCs. And I think a lot of those partnerships are very successful with commuter rail lines. So here in Chicago, Metra has a partnership with Uber. The DART system in Dallas currently has partnerships with Uber and Lyft for last mile connections, and that's sort of a hybrid system that acts as a commuter rail in addition to a heavy rail system for that region. So those would be the two key points, I think, for the suburban and exurban and rural areas where congestion necessarily is an issue. There still has to be coordination with the system as you're connecting to denser areas, in addition to a lens to ensure that we have inclusion in the system.
Great. I have my own issues with the mute button just then too. So thanks for that, Joe. I appreciate it. Moving right along, we asked earlier in the webinar about concerns people have moving forward. What are the topics that you're just particularly either concerned with or want to make sure these things get prioritized in policies that are developed? And one of the things that came up a few times was this whole idea of some of our most vulnerable users of the road, the elderly and seniors, people with limited mobility options, who really, I think people see the opportunity for those individuals, especially to take advantage of some of the technologies that we're talking about, really transforming the way that they can get around, but while still making sure that they are protected and that they have the ability to still access, very walkable environments and places that are comfortable to walk and bike and get around. So I wonder if any of you have looked into steps that agencies, maybe cities, have taken or work that you've done around this whole issue of prioritizing and protecting some of these especially vulnerable populations and making sure that what we're developing is going to work for them. Any thoughts on that from our panel?
I think there's a couple early examples that you're seeing here in the outside of the peer-to-peer networks as we look towards the future. The company Chariot, which is now a subsidiary of Ford Motor Company, is committing to an accessible vehicle strategy right now to ensure that there are accessible vehicles that could basically support all users of that. So I think that's a step in the right direction. Another one, the best practice I like to point out is in the city of Seattle and King County. There is a fee that goes into accessible vehicles. So even if it's and this is leveraged on taxis and TNCs, where the fee goes into an accessible vehicle fund to ensure that point-to-point trips are available to all use cases.
Great. Okay. Any other thoughts on that issue? I think it's important to think about moving forward, and I'm glad it was brought up, and the whole concept of equity and making sure that essentially it gets to this whole issue that we want to make sure that what we're developing is going to work for everybody, and we're not keeping anybody aside, and we're not developing something just for a certain group of people. So something to keep in mind for those communities out there who are interested in this topic for sure.
Yeah, and so Art here, I think one perspective on that is it reinforces the importance of fleet operation and shared ownership. That if we're really trying to address equity concerns and provide a broad range of mobility, we can't have autonomous vehicles just be owned by a certain set of privileged individuals. So, that in a fleet environment, you can balance out the cost and requirements to make sure that the system works well.
Great. Art, I'll keep it with you. Actually, a few questions have come up. We've got a good amount of our audience are representing advocacy organizations. So those who may not be involved in things from the city's perspective or the state's perspective, but they want to engage in this process of being proactive and assisting on the policy side of things. So I'm curious to know, in Portland, what's your experience been in that engagement side of things, involving have you been able to involve your advocacy community to make sure that their voices are heard in all of this, and maybe doing some more proactive outreach to them to get them at the table and involved in the process?
Yeah, there's been some. I mean, part of the intention of bringing the conversation sort of more into the light through a city council conversation was to sort of change the dynamic from being one that was sort of purely political from industry to more, how do we shape this? I can't say that we've done a ton at this point, in part because we wanted to see what kind of responses we got to the RFI in terms of exactly what are we talking about. But in terms of the policy framework, that is now before our Planning and Sustainability Commission, and that is a very public conversation with formal notice. And so we do hope for and really are recruiting more perspectives on that policy framework. And I think that's really a good place to begin in a lot of communities, would be ask for some deliberation at City Council, even if it isn't fully coming to resolution, and then asking for the formalized planning policy bodies to develop a draft policy, even if it isn't expecting to get to sort of all the answers. But that's really a way to change the shape of the conversation, and that's something that I think is relatively easy for different cities to take on. For those that are interested, if you go to portlandoregon.gov/savvy, S-A-V-I, pretty much everything that we've put out there is all on that site. So the council resolution, all those kind of pieces are all there.
Great, thank you very much. And I think that's going to serve as a great model for other cities to take a look at and think about. And I'll drop the link to that page in our chat pod once I get around to it. But Molly, I turn the question to you then and say, beyond what Art and his team are doing in Portland, would you be able to point our audience to other, maybe some of your member cities that you'd say, actually, these are maybe cities you want to look at for some good inspiration on what can be done, maybe some examples to follow, or maybe contacts to reach out to? Any cities come to mind for model policy?
Yeah, sure. And I would say I would highly recommend reaching out to Art and his team at PBOT. They do a lot of great work. Additionally, the team in Seattle, which Joe, I believe, has been working very closely with, is due to release their new mobility playbook, which has a really interesting lens on kind of what new mobility has the potential to do for cities, and kind of what happens if it goes unchecked. So look for that, I think, in the coming weeks. And that work is led by Evan Corey there. And then New York City always is ahead of the game, and they have a whole kind of task force working on this work around urban design out of their Department of City Planning and DOT. And feel free to reach out if you would like the contact there. Are there any specific areas, Dan, that people wanted to know more about, like which cities we're working on?
Yeah, no, I think I think that's a great list to start, and I think the interest, again, we're getting a lot of interest from cities that you might not immediately think of, not the biggest cities, not the most dense cities, but some of maybe mid-sized cities, more suburban settings. I think that this is where folks are monitoring the topic, as we learned in our last webinar, actively and wanting to know how to be engaged, but not seeing maybe a lot of examples that seem to be their peers. And so maybe that's something to watch moving forward is, we want to see some really good examples of how some more suburban communities are being proactive in this area. And that might be something for NACTO to think about. It might be something for our other organizations to be thinking about too, and being able to document those good examples.
Definitely.
I want to. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just to add to Molly's point, the Seattle New Mobility Playbook will be out September 6th is the planned launch date for anybody keeping tabs.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And this is Susan. If I can just add an example of a non-urban effort, we're working with counties in the San Joaquin Valley on a pilot project to use ride-sharing services in place of paratransit services. And I know there are other efforts like this going on. So that's not yet about automation, but it's certainly about how this idea of sharing can really increase mobility and also reduce public costs. So I think there are a lot of opportunities like that out there potentially.
Great. Excellent. And so, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of folks on this webinar are actively engaged and are following this topic closely. But maybe for those who are uninitiated or new to the topic, I wonder if Susan and Joe, I think you may have an answer to this question. Can you give us a sense of how far away we are from both the kind of full automation and that capability of vehicles, and how long do we expect to have sort of these mixed vehicle fleets on our roads where it's highly autonomous vehicles with maybe more traditional vehicles that we're used to? I mean, cities are thinking about timelines for doing this planning and being prepared. What sorts of timelines should they have in their minds?
So I will admit that I am not an expert on technology, but the popular estimates range from about 10 to 30 years. And we projected just with a compendium of those estimates that the year is probably around 2030. But you can find a new source every day that sort of contradicts that or updates that. But I would say the important point that we want to get across in our work is that this is an issue that cities will have to make sure that they're ready for, and there's tremendous opportunities there. But it is in the next generation. That's sort of what we believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not really qualified to answer that question either, but the academics, I think, are on the longer end of the estimates about when this will actually all be happening. But I think with respect to the built environment, it's especially important to be thinking now about things we can do that give us some flexibility for adapting to what's going to happen in the future. So parking requirements, for example. Do we want to keep building all these massive parking lots? Are we going to need that in the future? Can we do it in a way that there's flexibility to rebuild those spaces if we don't need that space in the future? Yeah. So there's a lot that cities do need to be thinking about now, though it's a challenge when there's so much uncertainty about when and exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. No, great points. Art, for Portland, are you all thinking about do you have timelines in mind that you're kind of looking ahead to, or is it sort of doing everything you can as soon as you can so you're ready?
Well, I think that's a perfect question. One of these other old adages that I think is pretty entertaining is that if you don't know where you're going, you're sure to get there, right? And so the point in what got me going in the last 6 months or to a year about this issue was that unless we are really articulate about the problems we're trying to solve and the priorities that we have for the city and are asking tech providers to respond to them, it is sort of obvious to me that they're not going to produce products that are answering those questions. Mm-hmm. And so that's really why we took the extra initiative to try to put our policy framework and our urban problems sort of out there. Is that unless we're articulating sort of a shared problem and shared goals, we're not going to end up with a set of products that respond to the needs of cities. We're going to be needing as cities to respond. We already are hearing from providers that they could be ready for levels of testing in the next year. So there's a whole array of sort of supposition around that. In terms of when do we get to the level of sort of full automation, I think we're a ways out from that. But in terms of needing to start to include these new technologies, I think it's coming very quickly, and we really do need as cities to make strong statements on what that will mean.
Great point there, and I think that's a great place to leave it. Unfortunately, we are out of time for our discussion today. I do encourage you to reach out to us, reach out to our panel. Keep that conversation going. We want to continue to hear what you're dealing with in this area, what you're working on. If you're working on policies right now, we'd love to hear about those examples. I'd encourage you to check out not only the recording from today and last time, but that new discussion guide we just released. Hopefully that'll help you think about some of the issues if you haven't already, and kind of organize your thoughts. I want to encourage you all to stick around after you close the webinar. We're going to launch a very brief survey for you to let us know what you think about this webinar, what you'd like to see out of future sessions. That's your chance to provide that feedback to us. We really do appreciate hearing that feedback and you taking time to do that. You're going to be receiving an email later today in about an hour with a link to our webinar archive page, instructions for downloading your certificate of attendance, a link to our discussion guide, and a few other things. So keep an eye out for that. I just want to say thank you so much to our panel, Molly Pilon, Susan Handy, Joe Iacobucci, and Art Pierce for their presentations today. And thanks to all of you for attending today's PBIC webinar. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.